All right, for a look now at these key international issues, we're joined in studio by SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena. Sophie, good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. So before we go to Ukraine, do we know who is coming to attend the G20 meeting in Johannesburg in person?
Well, I think most of the foreign affairs ministers who are members of the G20 will descend to South Africa for this meeting on Thursday. That would include, perhaps, we've invited guests. As you know, that the European Union is now another member of the G20. You also have recently African Union being added to this important group. You also have the UN that has got interest in terms of the outcomes of the G20 meeting later this year, and therefore you start now to be part of those discussions to ensure that whatever UN feels that are key issues, they are able to lobby at the early stage. And we expect that a high-profile UN delegation will be in the country. And the other important issue is that China will be represented by its foreign affairs minister. The announcement was made last week. We now know that Sergei Lavrov, the foreign affairs minister of Russian Federation, will also be attending. We heard earlier on when the minister of international relations of South Africa, Ronald Lamola, was in conversation with our colleague that much as US is not this time around sending a high-powered delegation at a senior level, they will be sending representatives. But what was breaking news for me was when he indicated that in relation to the finance ministers next week, as you know that the central bank governors and also the finance ministers will converge in Cape Town next week, members of the G20, that the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States of America will attend that meeting. The question is, perhaps they have avoided the Foreign Affairs Ministerial meeting because this is where you discuss mostly political global issues, while with finances you just focus on the economic growth. So for me that was a big breaking story that yes, there's this tension between South Africa and the US, but the Secretary of Treasury is coming next week to attend the meeting of the G20, where you will have central bank governors of these developed countries and developing countries that are part of G20 in Cape Town. I don't know whether it's because the meeting is in Cape Town or is it because this one is solely focused on economic issues. And this one of foreign affairs ministers, that's where you really clear all the issues that are of interest in terms of the global political situation. And I think it is going to be a heated one on Thursday when these countries are engaging on the current global issues.
And it would have been interesting to see the US attend that and possibly just raise some of the issues that they would have with our foreign policy right there with everybody at the table. But let's see then what happens with that one. But when you speak about the US, Sophie, right, the G20 meeting comes amid reports that the US and Russia will be meeting in Saudi Arabia for peace talks on the Ukraine war. You are listening to Vladimir Zelensky, who says nothing about Ukraine without us. But how significant is the meeting, given the fact that Zelensky himself doesn't want anything that is going to be discussed about his country without him being there?
You know, here it's the jostle of power in terms of the powerful nations. The European Union that Zelensky trusts so much feel that this process is now being taken over by America, as they did with the Middle East question, and we saw that peace agreement or the ceasefire agreement, not necessarily peace agreement, that led to different stages of releasing of hostages and those who were arrested by the Israeli officials from Gaza, from West Bank, and who are kept in jail. And therefore, we saw Donald Trump taking the glory. And now again, with the war in Ukraine, it looks like it will be Donald Trump who will ensure that we see a ceasefire. And this comes on the eve or next week on the 24th, when it will be 3 years since the war in Ukraine has started and no leader was able to broker peace. Many people tried. And therefore, again, Donald Trump is likely going to be commended for the role to push these two warring factions to agree on a ceasefire if it does happen before the 24th of February. And therefore, the Foreign Affairs Minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, will be flying to Saudi Arabia. And of course, we know that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is already in the Middle East. He is in Saudi Arabia. We saw him arriving. And therefore, they are going to meet and prepare for the meeting of President Vladimir Putin and President Donald Trump. We don't know when that meeting will happen, but these are part of the preparations. And from there, Sergei Lavrov will be flying down to South Africa. I think he is going to be in the country on Thursday. And as we indicated, Russia will be participating.
So it seems what the U.S. President Donald Trump said at his inauguration speech about wanting his legacy to be that of a peacemaker is something he's taking very seriously, given some of the issues that he's now getting involved with. But there's another story, of course, that we are still keeping our fingers on the pulse on, and that is around the conflict in the Eastern DRC. Lots being said about different reports. What's the latest?
Well, we know that when the president of DRC was in Germany, he indicated that he's willing to engage the Rwandan president, not the M23. On the other hand, you have the M23 yesterday, late last night, issuing a statement that they want a dialogue directly with Kinshasa, that is the government of the DRC. But also saying this because they've captured now more grounds in terms of the eastern part of the DRC. They've captured Bukavu and also the airport. And therefore, those advances have emboldened the M23 to say, now we are ready to negotiate. On the other hand, you know that the president of the DRC has indicated that he's not willing to engage with M23, but he's willing to engage with President Kagame. But we know that the AU summit made a clear call that the dialogue or negotiations or talks must be inclusive, including the M23. And they have also called on M23 to pull back and cessation of hostilities and called for ceasefire. Information that I have, we are struggling to confirm it, is that the DRC has also reached out to South Africa to ask South Africa to set up an emergency meeting to discuss this issue. But the problem here, I think South Africa is going to say a person or the country that has been given responsibility to bring all stakeholders together is Angola, and therefore do it through the Luanda talks. And now the president of Angola is the current chair of the AU. He's now even holding a powerful position at the heads of state and government level. And therefore, I think these are some of the stories behind the story that we know, and we've spoken to people, the sources that we trust in terms of the DRC story. It looks like the issue of talks, cessation of hostilities is really becoming an issue. But, you know, the warring factions would still have issues before they agree totally, and we see perhaps progress in terms of that. And I think the Luanda process, as the UN has also indicated, including the Nairobi process led by the former president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, are the proper platform and fora to handle the DRC matter.